Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Today on the show, I am delighted to welcome Jill Collinge. Jill is a highly acclaimed and respected historian and tour guide. Jill's built up a glowing reputation for extensive knowledge of the area in and around the Georgian town of Stamford from a historical, social and architectural perspective. She also heads up the Stamford Mayor's Guys. Hello, Jill, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Bob. Nice to meet you.
It's great to have you on the show. Been wanting to talk to you for some time, having had a visit or a tour back at Christmas.
All right.
With the Christmas tour that you did.
Yes.
Which was very good. And I have to say, this is the first time that we've been able to do a show out in the open all summer with somebody.
Oh, really?
Socially distanced, of course.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. Since COVID.
Oh, gosh.
All the other ones that we've done have been remote, so this is a first again for us. So
right.
It's great stuff.
Oh, good, yes.
So today we're going to talk about sayings that have gone back, a long, long time into history, but we still use today. But before we do that, Jill, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into sayings and history and tour guides and all that, please?
Basically, it goes back 30-odd years. I was very concerned about my brain. I couldn't remember any information, retain it. And I saw in the local library that they were running a course to train Lincolnshire Blue Badge tour guides. And I thought, well, I'm a Yorkshire lass, so I don't know anything about Lincolnshire, so it's a good way of finding out. And I loved history. I applied and I was accepted, and that's when all the hard work started then. And I've never looked back. I just love the work.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent.
And I've got the brain going a bit.
That's really good, isn't it? Important to keep the brain going, I must admit. No, I mean, I have to say, I've seen lots of glowing reviews on TripAdvisor for the tours that you've been doing over the last few years. And you've also had quite a bit of experience with TV, haven't you, both local and national and radio? Yes,
and particularly sort of the Middlemarch era.
Right.
But yes, I've been so fortunate. One of the perks, really, of doing the guiding, that I've met a number of personalities. I've taken the Duke of Gloucester around Stamford. I've taken Prince Charles around Stamford.
Oh, right.
David Gower. I've been on the Richard and Judy show telling ghosty stories. And all this has happened, really, just by doing this exam. To be a Blue Badge tour guide.
Okay.
And I've been known in the media for sort of knowing quirky things. So if they want something quirky, Jill Collinge will come up with something quirky. So, and that's what appeals to me.
Yeah. And where do you actually get all this information from? Is it from the library, the internet?
No, it just sort of accrues. I become interested in something, and then I think, well, why that or how that? And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
And then it grows. And once you find an interest, then all sorts of things sort of just come to you.
Yes.
That you would never... Life is very strange like that. You suddenly have a bit of information, and then suddenly that information is accrued by just a passing phrase seeing something.
Yes.
Quite amazing. And then it just all builds up.
And it's obviously given you a lot of opportunity to meet various people as well.
Yes. And that's the lovely thing. In my past life, I was a hospital cardiographer.
Oh, right.
I loved people.
Yes.
And of course, they're healthy now, people I'm meeting, which is much nicer.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. So today we're going to talk about sayings.
Yes.
Things like, for example, pin money or whatever. And I must admit, I've often wondered where they come from, and we still use them. So, and you're interested in sayings. Do you incorporate these on the tours that you give?
Yes, I do. Yes, because people seem to like them.
Yes.
And often, if you see somebody after a few years and say, "Oh, I came on a tour with you," and such. Oh, I remember you said, a saying, and they remember that. They won't remember dates, they won't remember a lot of things, but if it finds the imagination, it's often sayings that they just love.
And I noticed that you put quite a few of these sayings every Friday on social media.
Yes, I do.
Yes. You've been getting a lot of interest from that, haven't you?
Yes, I've really been quite surprised, the interest that I got, and my likes have been increasing, which is wonderful. Yes, and I enjoy doing them as well.
Have you still got plenty to do?
Yes, I have.
Lots of sayings.
Yes, I thought I might finish, and then I thought, well, no, there's still interest, so I think I'll just sort of carry on.
It's amazing how many there are, isn't there?
Oh, it's never ending.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think what we ought to do then, Jill, is we ought to hand over to you, and you ought to tell the listeners a little about, some of these sayings.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, I won't bore you with all of them because I have a huge box file. So I like to categorise them so it acts as an aide-memoire to me, but also to the listener as well. And of course, this area in Lincolnshire and Rutland was known for its sheep. That's where the wealth came from. That's why we could build all these amazing churches.
Yeah.
And so there are a number of sayings from the wool trade. So if you had a black sheep in the family...
Yes.
You knew there was going to be trouble because it was thought that the black sheep was a sign of the devil.
Oh, right.
But also, from a practical point of view, you didn't get any money for its fleece.
Right.
And
so what? Sorry to interrupt. What would they do with it? Would they eat it as mutton or something?
Well, they would use it to clothe themselves.
Oh, right.
They would use, because everything could be used, the fleece, the lanolin, which was good to weatherproofing.
Yeah.
And also, because of these superstitions, then they grew. So there was this thing that if you wanted to avoid the plague, if you wrapped yourself up in a black fleece, you wouldn't get it.
Oh, right.
Or probably pertinent today, if you have rheumatism or arthritis, wrap yourself in a black fleece and it'll vanish right away.
It's carrying on.
Yes. So, and then... the shepherds would always tar their sheep to keep any illnesses and diseases from them at the start of the year. And it was a very mean shepherd that spoilt the sheep for an ha'porth of tar. Because sheep and ship are the Old English words for the animal. So if you look around, in this area you have shep, shed, which was all to do with sheep. You have Shipley, sheep, Skipton, which is also meaning a town of sheep. So spoiling the ship for an ha'porth of tar, it isn't anything to do with maritime.
Right.
It's to do with the wool trade. Yeah. And all tarred with the same brush, comes from the same expression. And also, not only was it stopping the animal from having any diseases, but it kept away the foxes. They didn't like the smell of the tar.
Okay.
So, and I was giving this talk a few years ago, and a lady said, well, I do the same. I use tar on my chickens because it keeps the foxes away.
Yes.
So, it's still going on. When you wanted to dye your wool, you would dye it in the wool and not the cloth.
Right.
You often hear politicians are dyed in the wool.
Yes.
Because if you dyed it in the wool, the colour would remain. Whereas if it was woven and then you dyed it, it could fade.
Oh, okay.
So it was very important to be dyed in the wool.
Yeah.
So when you have your wool, you need on cloth, you need to tighten it up. Otherwise, the winter winds would blow straight through it. So you'd put the woven cloth in a mixture of fuller's earth and urine. And the fullers or the walkers or the amblers, these are all surnames that came about from this process of the wool. Yeah. They would walk or amble on the cloth. It would all become matted up. They'd take the matted cloth to the tenter meadows, stretch it on tenter hooks, and then it was ready to make into your woolly pulley.
Oh, tenter hooks.
And the word tenter comes from the Latin word tentus, which simply means to stretch. So you get the origin of a tent from that as well. Yeah. So you can see that there are a number of
So it's not just the saying, is it? It's actually the words that come out as well.
Yes,
and how they've evolved into the English language.
Yes,
That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And sort of staying with shepherds, when there were more forests, the lords of the manor, the forest belonged to the king for his hunting, or the lords of the manor. So the peasants weren't allowed into the woods, and they could be fined very heavily. You could have an ear cut off if you were found just picking up beech nuts from a wood, etc. And so there was a certain time of the year, getting to late autumn, where the peasants were allowed in to the woods, and they could get fuel from the trees that they could reach by hook or by crook.
Another one.
So
I didn't see that one coming.
So moving on then, haymaking.
Yeah.
And the Old English word for haymaking was mathing. M-A-T-H-I-N-G.
Okay.
So after the hay had been cut, then the women and children would go into the fields and pick up the aftermath that was left before the sheep and cattle could then
The
go
aftermath.
in. Yes. So moving on to social habits. The Saxons, their crowning glory was their hair, and men and women would have it way below their waist. And then the Normans arrived. And when the Saxon spies first saw the Normans arriving on the coast, they thought it was an army of invading monks because they all had little short bowl cuts.
Yeah.
And the Saxons were quite horrified at this. But of course the Normans were very religious, and they thought that long hair was a sign of vanity. Therefore it was a sign against God. So the men would all cut their hair in a little bowl shape. So what could the women do? The women couldn't possibly cut their hair. So it became the fashion from Norman times right up to the Tudor times to pile your hair up into your headdress, and your headdress made your beauty statement. You would pluck out the hair to the middle of your head, you would get rid of your sideburns, get rid of the hair in the nape of your neck, shave off your eyebrows, so all you saw was this pale wan face in this beautiful headdress. And it was only in the boudoir with your lover or your husband that a lady would let her hair down.
Right. I didn't see that coming either.
In the dress that people wore, men and women, the sleeves were detachable because they were often the things that got dirty, but also you would change them depending on what was the fashion.
Yes.
So you could have billowy sleeves, you could have straight sleeves with a pointy end at the wrist. And it was a custom that if your loved one was going off to fight in the 100 Years' War, or if it was simply Valentine's Day, the lady would show her love by giving the sleeve of her favourite gown. And then it was a case of wearing one's heart on one's sleeve. And it was Henry VIII that received a green gown from an admirer, which gave him the inspiration to write green sleeves.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. You'd never know. Well, you know.
Yes. I do a talk and I call it I Never Knew That, because you can hear people going, well, I never knew that. Yeah. So, moving to the court of Versailles.
Yes.
The Louis XIV, the Sun King, was quite a precocious king, and it was quite an immoral court. And there were certain members of court that thought it should be brought back to a more pure state. And who better to do this than to employ a fire and brimstone priest? So he was duly installed in the chapel at Versailles. And his masses just went on and on and on. And this presented a problem for the ladies at court who were there in their very straight, tight corsets. And so because of the pressure, nature would call a little more frequently. So where could a lady go? She couldn't possibly leave the mass. And so it became the custom amongst the ladies at the court of Versailles to wear little porcelain receptacles underneath their gowns, so that when nature called, they just had to sing just a little bit louder. This caught on in England, and we too were wearing little receptacles underneath our gowns. And they were named after the fire and brimstone priest, whose name was Monsieur Bourdaloue. And in fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, on the Antiques Roadshow, a gentleman presented this gravy boat that had been in the family for years, that had brought out every Sunday for the roast, only to be told that it was in fact a Bourdaloue.
Oh my goodness. So it wasn't a gravy boat. I could see that one coming as well.
So talking about corsets.
Yeah. As you do.
As one does, yes. And everybody wore them. Even little children would be wearing corsets, yes. Oh, right. I went to the Museum of Dress at Bath, and there were these tiny tiny little stays that boys and girls were having to wear. And of course, George IV was known. He had I think a 52-inch waist, so he would wear a corset, and a lot of the men did, particularly the generals going out to battle. So, in order to achieve your 14, 15-inch waist, your lady-in-waiting would tighten your corsets, and quite naturally, you didn't want to flop out halfway through the evening. And so to make sure that they stayed secure, they would be fastened horizontally.
Right.
This presented a bit of a problem if you were a courtesan or a mistress, where speed was the essence. And so you would fasten your corsets vertically, which aimed for quicker release. And the vertically bound ladies would rather frown on their horizontally bound sisters, thinking they were very straight-laced.
Straight-laced. Right.
So we're all dressed now in our finery. We're going off to the assemblies.
Yeah.
And assemblies are very important, particularly in 18th century society life, because this is where you met your prospective husband or wife. So you had to look your very best. And you were wearing your white lead makeup, men and women.
White lead?
Yes, and of course it was highly toxic. It's plumbago.
No health and safety then?
No, indeed. But as today, you had to follow fashion, whether it was good or not.
Yeah, very true.
And so you would pile on the white lead and you would leave it on. And the most important utensil in your cosmetic bag was a chisel, because after a few weeks you'd chisel off the white lead and then you could start all over again.
Chisel off your face?
Yeah.
My goodness.
So you can imagine what it was doing to your skin.
Yeah.
And because of the white lead, you were then powdering your wigs, and the powder was making you go bald. Your hair was coming out in handfuls. And so it became the fashion then to have when children were born, to put walnut strips, rags doused in walnut, on the hairline to stop the hair from growing, because it then became the fashion to sort of be a bit bald. Also, eyebrows were a great problem, because you were shaving them off. It was a fashion for both men and women to shave off your eyebrows, but you would replace them with mouse fur.
Mouse fur?
Yes. So your eyebrows could be anywhere that you wanted on your face. And I think with your hairline vanishing, then the higher your brows went, the better. So this brought about the expression of the highbrow. It's so easy when you know,
yeah.
isn't
I'm starting to get into this now, Jill. I won't steal your thunder, but I am beginning to learn how they came about now.
Well, it is. It's just for everyday living, really, and these things come about.
Yeah.
And then in the 18th century, teeth were a problem because, of course, the wealthy could afford sweet sugary things, so they had the rotten teeth. And so you would have your teeth pulled out and replace them with false teeth. Yeah. Usually from a cadaver, or the poor would sell their teeth to be made into false teeth. If you didn't want to go to those limits, the ladies could always hide their rotten teeth with their fans. But what could the gentlemen do? So it became the custom amongst the upper-class gentlemen to talk with their top lip brought over their rotten teeth, which brought about the expression of the stiff upper lip. So you're waiting to find your eligible partner. Unfortunately, if you weren't so attractive, this could be quite difficult, because when you went to the assemblies, the master of ceremonies would decide where the ladies could sit. So the most attractive young ladies would sit on the front row, and depending on your age or your looks, you were placed further and further to the back of the tiers of seats. So the poor little girl on the back row was the wallflower. So it's time to go home now. So we want to hail our carriage. Now, if you were upper class, to impress your neighbours, you would throw in the odd French word to impress them. And this happened when you were hailing your carriage, because the French word for a carriage was a chariot or chariot. Chariot is the supermarket trolley in France nowadays. And so when you wanted your carriage, you would say chariot, chariot, which eventually became cheerio. Cheerio.
That's amazing. I never knew that. I don't know many people, listeners than that, would actually know that. That's amazing.
Well, but it's interesting to see how many words from France, particularly during the First World War,
yes,
we anglicised. So the soldiers would hear often the French saying, "À tout à l'heure, see you soon," which became toodaloo, which was
and that was from the First World War?
That was the First World War, yes.
Wow.
And bœuf brouillé, boiled beef, was bully beef. And it came out, so it changes. Yeah. It's fascinating.
I wonder if it's still happening now, whether people in 50 years' time will have sayings that go back to now.
I bet it does. I bet it will do. Yeah. Yes, that you just pick up these phrases and then anglicise it.
Yes,
because we're very good at doing that. So I'm sure there will be lots more. I can't think at the moment whether there are any more. But no, because unfortunately the French are often using our words as well now, which is a
more
bit
Americanised,
of a shame.
aren't they, in their language?
Yes, like weekend and okay.
McDonald's.
Yeah, McDonald's, yes.
So what's next then, Jill?
Grass widow, I think.
Grass widow?
Yes. There are two origins of this saying. The first one goes back to medieval times. And it's actually quite a word of warning.
Oh, is it?
Yes. Because when a young buck of the village would brag to his mates that he had given a green gown to a young girl of the village,
yes,
it meant actually that he'd had a roll in the hay with her and she'd ended up with grass stains on her gown. And sometimes, of course, the inevitable happened. The girl became pregnant. Where was the young buck then? Nowhere to be seen. And so the poor unfortunate girl became a grass widow. And often on Valentine's Day, a young man would then boast as well that he was giving a green gown to a young lady that he fancied. So, ladies, if anybody comes up with an offer of a green gown, well, turn it down.
Immediately.
Or not, depending.
yeah, depending on how you feel.
And the other example, when, of course, we were in India, the army was in India, and often the tours were escorted. And when it got really hot on the plains, then the wives and family were sent up into the hills where it was cooler and where the grass was still growing, and they became the grass widows.
Oh, okay.
So you can take your pick.
Yes, depending how you feel.
Yes. Before we had the beds as we know them, the comfy beds and mattresses, you would sleep on a wooden board that had ropes attached. And this is what you slept on, and then you'd put your straw on these ropes.
Yes.
And, of course, after quite a while, these ropes became loose, and so you would be able to tighten them up. And then you would have a good night's sleep, or you were sleeping tight.
Sleeping tight. Sleep tight.
The Romans were terrified of the left-hand side. In fact, the Latin for left is sinistra. And they went to great lengths to avoid anything to do with the left. And we get the expression, of course, getting out of bed on the wrong side, which is the left-hand side. But just going back to that, if you do sleep on the left-hand side, don't worry, because when you get out of bed, put your right foot on the floor first. So you're making the sign of the cross, and then your day will be fine.
Oh, right, so that cancels it out.
Yes.
You don't have to get out on the right side of the bed.
No, you can get out on the wrong side as long as you make the sign of the cross with your feet. So going back to the Romans would employ a slave to stand by the villa door if visitors were coming, to make sure that the visitor put their right foot over the threshold first before they came into the house. And so this slave eventually became known as the footman.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
Isn't it?
Yeah, so that's
so
actually,
simple.
Yeah, so that originates 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So quite amazing.
Yeah.
So moving on to occupations. In order for the hatters to make the stiff top hats, they would use mercury. And of course, mercury is highly toxic. They would be inhaling the fumes, they would be touching it, it would be going into their skin. And one of the effects of mercury poisoning is that you start to hallucinate, so you became as mad as a hatter.
That's an interesting one.
At one time, there were just two universities, Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah.
And often you only got there because of the title of your father, not for your academic qualities. There were wealthy benefactors who would set up grammar schools for the brighter children in the town, brighter boys, rather, in the town.
Just the boys?
Yes, not the girls, brighter boys in the town.
Okay.
And often there would be a scholarship attached for the brightest boy. So from the grammar school in our town, our young boy has gone off to Cambridge University. And when he gets there, he has to sign the register, and he writes his name, and then there would be a column where he has to put the title of his father. If he's just a lad from the local town, he has no title, so therefore in that column he would write sine nobility, without nobility, SNOB for short, which is what all his friends thought about him when he returned back to his hometown.
Snob.
Snob.
You'd never have guessed that, would you?
No. No.
That's amazing.
So you have. We often say in England we have chalky whites, which is obvious if your surname is White.
Yes.
So why do you have knobby clerks? Well, only the wealthy could afford to employ a clerk. So you were a clerk to the nobility. So you became known as a knobby clerk. The word news comes from the four corners of the world, north, east, west and south, where all the news is coming from.
Oh, wow.
So simple.
It is it's a very simple one, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Moving on to the coach trade. In the 18th century, the coaches were racing up and down the Great North Road from London to Edinburgh, and they were four horses pulling a full carriage could do about 25 miles going at full speed, and then the horses had to be changed. So there were coaching stops all the way up the Great North Road. There would be a coach leaving Old Holborn in London for Edinburgh, and on the way it would stop at the Cock Inn at Stony Stratford. There was a coach leaving Birmingham on its way up to Edinburgh. It would stop at the Bull Inn at Stony Stratford. And the passengers would tell their stories, and they'd all become a little bit exaggerated until it became a complete cock and bull story. And if you think that's what I'm telling you, all you have to do is to go to Stony Stratford, and the Cock Inn and the Bull Inn are still going strong today.
That's amazing. Yeah. Cock and bull story.
Cock and bull story.
Yeah.
So when you were at these coaching stops, presumably on your way back, you would end up with the same horses that you'd left London from, or Edinburgh, depending on which way you were going. Yeah. Not so if you went via Cambridge, because there was a rather irascible publican there called Thomas Hobson, and it was Hobson's choice which horses he took out of the stable for you. Taxes. We've had taxes since the world began. The window tax. We needed more money to fight the French, to fight the French against the Spanish in the Spanish War of Succession. So the window tax was introduced. If you had more than 6 windows, you were taxed on them. So to avoid the tax, you blocked the windows in. And this is where you get the expression of daylight robbery.
Wow.
There was also, going back to Viking times, if you didn't pay your tax, they would split your nose in half. and then you were paying through the nose.
There's no end to these, Jill.
No, they just go on and on. You don't think I'm making them all up, do you?
No, I don't. No, I must admit, the more you think about them, the more you realise that they do actually come from something. It's how they actually... But I never knew that about the news. North, south, east and west.
Yes.
Yeah. Or north,
so
east,
simple.
west and south.
Yes. Yeah. And I suppose today, with computers and technological things, there must be a load of expressions. Well, we have that, when somebody says, can I meet you on such and such a day? Yeah. And then the other person say, I'll see if I've got a window.
Yes.
I really don't like that
That's
expression.
That's a fairly new one, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So there will be, for the modern day,
yeah.
anything sort of that affects society, there will be sayings that come up from it. So, Bob, I hope I've come up to scratch. And I hope that you don't think I've been telling you all a load of my eye and Betty Martin. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Jill, for all that. That's amazing. I think you've really given us a huge amount of detail there about a lot of the sayings that have evolved over the English language over the last, 2,000 years, I guess. Yeah.
And it makes the language so much more colourful,
Yeah, it does.
It?
I think now when I start talking to people, I'm going to have to really be careful what I say. So can you tell us a little bit about the Stamford tour guides, or the Mayor's Guides as they're known?
Yes, I thought I would like to not do as much work as I have been doing, have some time for myself. Yeah. And I wanted to pass on my information of 35 years guiding as the Stamford Town Guide. And so I found 5 wonderful people who were very keen, loved history. And I decided that if they went to learn all the historical information about the town, which is very important, obviously, but I didn't want it to be my tour.
Yeah.
And they would have all their different views. The men would have different ideas to the girls on the tour. But I would show them how to present it, because presentation is so important. Yeah. And we were out, rain, hail, blow and snow in the winter months. They all endured it, and they endured me. And then there were exams at the end, and the people were of a historical background that were testing them. They all passed with flying colours.
Excellent.
And unfortunately, they were all set to go, so keen to go. Unfortunately, COVID then came along. Oh. But it has been lessened slightly, and we can take up to 6 people, one being the guide, of course, around the town.
Social
distancing, etc. Yeah. And it's safe for the town, and it's safe for the guides, and safe for the visitors. And they are proving very successful, which is wonderful news.
That's excellent. And how's trade? Is it got busy again?
Yes, it has. In fact, we just started doing one Sunday in July onwards, in the summer months, one Sunday. And we've had to extend our times and our days. And in fact, on Bank Holiday weekend, they were doing 2 tours were in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And they're just going from strength to strength. And I'm so delighted. And now they're just preparing to do some ghost walks.
Oh, right. Ready for, Halloween?
For Halloween time, yes. Okay. They're putting that together.
So if people, any listeners out there are interested in coming on one of these tours or going on a ghost walk, can they? Where would they find information, Jill?
On Facebook.
Yeah.
It is the Mayor's Guides on Facebook. We do have a website.
That's fine. Well, what I'll do, I'll get the details and I'll put everything on the show notes. So if people are interested in doing something,
that's wonderful.
They can make contact with you and have a good time.
Yes, or they can contact me and I can pass on, because I'm still guiding.
Yes.
But not this year. I'm waiting for next year.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Have you got any other projects coming up at all that you'd like to tell listeners about, Jill?
We're hoping to put together packages for overseas, so that they can enjoy our part of the world.
Yeah.
And we've got good contacts, so hopefully it will be 2021, 2022. And also we're going to do themed walks. I'm hoping the Christmas walks will go again.
Well, I can thoroughly recommend that. I went on one of your first ones at Christmas, which was, I think it was very nice actually, because we had some some wine.
Yes, we did.
Mulled wine.
We did, and the wind blew.
It was a very cold day, wasn't it?
It was a very cold day. And sadly, because I also then do a Valentine's Day walk, and the heavens opened, so it had to be cancelled, which was unusual. I don't think it's ever happened before. But
and no doubt, the people on the tour, they hear some more of these sayings from yourself.
Yes, and they hear all sorts. The guided tours, there's history there. There's all the information you want to know. Yeah. But also there's all sorts of social history that you learn as well, and personalities which make the tour very interesting.
Well, Jill,
they've been successful.
Thank you ever so much for coming on this show. It's been absolutely fascinating with some of the studying and the work you've done on these sayings, and I think it's great for everybody to know where they come from. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Bob. Thank you.
My thanks go to today's guest, Jill Collinge. I found the conversation with Jill absolutely fascinating. It's incredible how things we say are interspersed with sayings that have evolved throughout history and that we still use all the time. Jill has an amazing grasp on this subject. Also, if you're ever planning to visit Stamford in England, I can thoroughly recommend going on one of her tours. You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.